Often we get very negative emails or rude emails, and you just don't know how to deal with them. So, of course, I'm a professor, right? So I get negative emails from students. I get negative emails, and for all sorts of reasons, right? Grades, or maybe they just were unhappy with something that happened in class, or just all sorts of crazy things like that. Maybe I get negative emails from my reviewers when I send in my articles, journal articles to people to get review, and they come back and they're sort of really negatively written. Maybe it is from other faculty and stuff. Well, that doesn't happen really. I mean, that doesn't happen that much. Every once in a while it does happen, because there's lots of crazy stuff that happens in the real world, right? Just like a real workplace, but it's not really all that common. However, but I know that some of you actually deal with this on a regular basis of dealing with, so for example, if you're working and you get negative emails from your customers and things like that, well, how do you actually deal with all of this negative stuff, right? People are trying to sort of just go on you, right? And just beat you up. Well, that's it's kind of a normal thing, or you deal with that in a regular. I mean, it's kind of a regular business thing to deal with, right? For most people. And so I'm going to give you a couple of tips on how to actually respond to that. So the first thing with advice with dealing with emails professionally, or dealing with any sort of communication professionally, I would really look into a good book. And the good book that I recommend, it's really stinking old, and it's kind of one of these self-help books and stuff like that, but it's How to Make Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Super, super great book. And particularly if you sort of take it down and you really digest it, a lot of the Dale Carnegie stuff is really good, and you try to digest what they're saying. It really does change you, and change you how to respond to different things. So how would I actually deal with negative emails? And, this is just my own tips and stuff like that I've learned. So the first one is don't respond to negative emails, right? So particularly with, I get negative emails from students right around grade time. That is kind of a normal occurrence, right? Every time that their grades come back, it's just, all right. So you just don't want to, I don't respond. If any email that is necessarily rude, or anything like that, I tried not to respond to it, or at least not respond to it for a few days, because that's not going to accomplish anything. The reason why is not because I'm trying to be rude and not address a particular situation. From my point of view, what you have to really be careful of is that emails are permanent, right? So if you send an email to somebody and they get it, oftentimes, particularly if there's a different status power dimension that happens, right? So for example, in my situation, I am the higher status person, right? I have more power over the student. They're going to take that feedback that they get, or that email that I send them, and really think about it and sort of dwell on it. And it's going to be often really, even if I don't mean it, it's going to be really harmful for them in terms of their personal development and kind of things like that. So I take it really, really seriously, and I don't want to be harmful to their sort of long-term personal benefit. The other thing with emails, and so that'll stick with them forever, right? And it does, right? So they'll go back and look at it. And then the other thing with rude emails or negative emails with really negative tones and stuff like that, it's often just people vent on emails, and they shouldn't, or they vent on sort of the text, but they really shouldn't. They frustrated, and they want to let out their frustrations. And often it's just frustrations rather than, an actual constructive criticism or anything like that, or how to deal with something. If they persist repeatedly over and over and over again, often you could just say that it went into your spam filter or something like that if you eventually respond, because that means that they're angry enough that they're dealing with it, and they're dealing with those issues, and you maybe have to respond. Or maybe for a customer, for example, that's really negative and whatnot, you maybe should respond relatively quickly, but not, too quickly, because you want to let it sort of die down, all those angry feelings and stuff like that. Not for you, but for them to let that die down, because sleeping on things, right? We do know from behavioral science and psychology and stuff, just having some sleep is going to calm you down a lot. So having a couple of sleep cycles and having them sort of sleep for a couple of days, it's going to really calm them down, and they're going to be able to address this in a much more sort of proactive, better way. So I wouldn't respond to anything that's negative really quickly, particularly within a matter of hours. The other thing that's going to happen if you get into these sort of negative email spirals, where you send something, they send something, back and forth, and nothing gets accomplished, and it's a total waste of time, and everybody's just agitated and mean and upset, and nothing happens, right? It's just a load of crap, to be honest, at that moment. And you want to avoid anything like that. And so if you continuously keep getting negative emails and stuff like that, and people are really taking things out on you, what I do with responding is I'll often just say, can we take this offline? Right? I'll just send a little short note saying, I feel where you're coming from. Could we come talk to my office, and we're going to talk face to face about this particular thing. Sometimes it's really tough, right? You have these awful, awkward conversations, but the awkward conversation with person to person is a lot better than the email, because there's somehow anonymity and this sort of barrier that you get allows you to get a lot more emotional. The person to person, they can see where you're coming from. You're communicating a lot more information and all that kind of stuff, and then you could deal with it a little bit more. Another way that you could deal with it is to deal with it in a very non-professional way. And I'm not saying to be mean and nasty, and I'm not trying to say make fun of things, but really let your guard down and say, that email that you sent me, you can write this all in there. It really hurt. This is a really painful thing for you to say, and here is why it was really painful for me, and I interpreted it this way. So what you're kind of doing is putting the ball in their court, and you're really just being open and honest and saying, that was offsides, and that was uncalled for, what you did. It really did hurt me, and it hurt my feelings and how I actually dealt with it. And then you could say, what is really truly going on here? What's going on behind the scenes? And often you can sort of open up a lot more conversation, and they're going to take their guard down a lot more when you're not kind of like butting heads, and you're just being open and honest. And you're saying, this is what is really going on here. This really hurts my feelings. I'm just getting angry, and I don't want to get angry in this situation. This is really awkward. How can we actually deal with this in an appropriate way? What would go on? So that might be a really nice way to deal with a customer that's really angry, and say, I'm just trying to do my best. And this was really, and what you did was, it was offsides, and it really did hurt what was going on. So, but I truly understand that there's something probably going on behind the scenes, and how can we actually address that? That's a really nice way to deal with those kind of things. And the other thing so a fourth way that you could deal with it, and I find sometimes this is useful with, so for example, students that are sending me grade complaints and stuff, I just respond in a very sympathetic but very systematic way, right? So I just say, well, this is A, B, and C reasons why this actually happened in this way, and it's just sort of a matter of fact. And also putting the situation of like, okay, in my spot, I have to make sure that things are fair for all the other students, and it's really tough to deal with all of that. And this is the reason why I gave you the grade that I got, because A, B, and C, and it's really tough to deal with any of this kind of stuff. From my side, I'm trying to make it as fair. If I give you arbitrary grades or different treatment and things like that, then that's not fair for the rest of the students in this similar situation, right? That are in these kind of situations, and maybe that there's some sort of way that I can show you through, come into my office, and we can have a face-to-face, and I can show you, how I actually arrived at this. And it'd be very open and honest, right? And then at that point, when they come into the office, I show them these are the answers, and we talk through, and it usually gets resolved really, really effectively and very, very quickly in that way. The other thing, when you're getting this sort of negative situation, try not to do it in groups. Try to respond one-to-one and sort of break up any, particularly if there's a group of people that are sort of attacking you. That is a really bad situation. It's going to be a lose-lose situation for you, and you want to desensitize that. It's one thing that I've really, truly learned over the years. So creating maybe systems or something like that where you can respond individually versus the group, that's going to be a lot more helpful in the long run than, kind of addressing a group and stuff, because they're not going to see it. It's not going to be personal enough for them to see what's going on and addressing those individual concerns, right? So that's it. The one thing I really wanted to point out is, if there's any sort of systematic negative emails, if there is, somebody abusing you, and abusing is repeatedly negative emails for a long time, right? A long time being probably more than 5 emails of sort of negative, beating you up repeatedly. You don't have to deal with that kind of stuff, right? Like, that is totally offsides, especially if you try to address it in different ways. You really don't have to deal with that. You can block that situation. If a customer keeps complaining and beating up on that, you can fire that customer. You don't have to deal with that kind of stuff. If your boss is continuously raining on your parade over and over and over again, and it's really getting to you, and it's been like, a couple of months, that's like that, you don't have to deal with that. Just leave, right? There's no point of actually dealing with that kind of stuff in the long run. That's just going to eat you up. It's going to take all the energy from you. And just, you just got to look for another alternative. And you just know that you can put up borders and boundaries and stuff like that to deal with that kind of stuff. Because those people are dealing with things that you don't know about, that you can't get to, and it's not going to change them in any sort of response that you have. Right, so make sure that it's always constructive, and the what you're addressing is sort of constructive stuff, and anything that's sort of just negative emotional attacks and things like that. It's to be honest, that's just bullying after a while, right? If it's 4 or 5 emails, 4 is okay, I can get it, it's still emotional and all that stuff. Over 5 emails repeatedly, or 5 episodes of anything like that repeatedly in a fairly short period of time, within a matter of months, that's just abusive at that moment, right? That's offsides, and you can address that kind of stuff. And anytime you start feeling like that, just leave. It's not worth it. Start looking for other situations. Maybe you have to deal with it because you have to pay your bills and all that kind of stuff. So you deal with it a very short period of time while you're looking for something else in that circumstance. So truly, that's an important thing to think about as you're going. So, if you like this video, make sure you give me a thumbs up, as well as subscribe to the videos